Today in the hot seat is Harry Winkley from Herrington Carmichael, a top law firm here in the UK.
I've seen a lot of scenarios where people have done it on the cheap and then it comes back to bite them later on when they come to exit. You look at the cost at the initial stage and you think, well, that's a bit too much, but then 5 years down the line, it costs you about 10 times. You set up a business, probably with a close friend of yours, everything's perfect, you trust each other to the end, but one thing I say is that money corrupts everybody. And 5 years down the line, are you really confident on that handshake deal?
I've seen a business take an investment, which was really a loan, and then they give equity away. So it's as if I'm offering to buy, I'm going to loan you 100K, Harry, right now, but I also want 40% of your business, and You're going to repay me for the loan.
Yeah. And they see that ChatGPT can give them a contract very quickly. But what I would say is, if you use ChatGPT to do your contract, one, you're going to have a contract which you don't understand and that you haven't had a lawyer explain to you. If ChatGPT gets it wrong, who are you going to sue?
Well, welcome to the next episode of the 80/20 Thought Leadership Podcast. Today in the hot seat is Harry Winkley from Herrington Carmichael, a top law firm here in the UK. And we're here to distill a lot of insights for business owners, specifically in the UK, small business owners, medium-sized business owners, big business owners, about the importance of having the right legal structures in your business, having the right advice, and what the pitfalls might be. Personally, through my journey as a business owner and somebody who has investments in businesses and advises companies, I see a lot of people cheap out early on the right advice, whether it's legal, whether it's tax, and it really comes back to bite them in the arse further down the line. So this episode is specifically for all of you people who want to understand, well, why do I need a lawyer? When do I need one? And what is the cost of not doing it? So welcome, Harry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dylan. So I am a corporate solicitor, as you said, at Herrington Carmichael, and I predominantly specialise in mergers and acquisitions. So I help a lot of business owners either build value if they're looking for inorganic growth, or SME businesses that are looking to either acquire loads of more businesses, or business owners that are looking to exit and finally realise that value that they've built up over time. So I've seen, a lot of scenarios where people have done it on the cheap and then it comes back to bite them later on when they come to exit, where you look at the cost at the initial stage and you think, well, that's a bit too much, but then 5 years down the line, it costs you about 10 times. So no, it's great to be here and looking forward to discussing the experiences, and I'm sure you have a lot of the same. So yeah, it'd be good to explore those.
Great. So what if we kick off with classic scenario for most startups and small businesses, often the lack of a contract in itself at all, whether that's an employment contract or a contract between yourself and a customer. How can we help business owners understand what they need and what not to do? Definitely.
So a lot of it depends on what your business structure is and how many partners you've got, if you're going alone or if you're going with, what you consider friends at the time or new partners that you're getting involved. That really will underpin the key contracts that you need when you're setting up a business. So as soon as you turn your idea into a business, that's when you need to be thinking about these contracts, because I understand when you're setting up a business, there's so many costs and you want to make sure that the legal fees are proportionate to the size of your business at the time. But it's these considerations that you make at this early stage that will impact you in the long term. So one of the key documents that you need to consider, particularly if you've got other partners, is a shareholders agreement or an investment agreement, particularly if you're investing funds into that new startup. This goes hand in hand with a bespoke set of articles of association, because the common thing that we see, and it always unfortunately comes raveling down, is you set up a business probably with a close friend of yours, everything's perfect, you trust each other to the end, but one thing I say is that money corrupts everybody. And 5 years down the line, are you really confident on that handshake deal? So a shareholders agreement sets out everybody's rights and responsibilities in respect to the company that they're managing. It tells you what you're going to get on exit, tells you your voting rights, all of those things, so that if there's ever a dispute, you pull up this piece of paper and it tells you, okay, you've got this right, you can't go and do this behind someone's back, and it prevents those scenarios where you have deadlock. The amount of times we get business owners, they've set up a business with a very close friend, even family, we see it all the time with family, and then there's deadlock and the business can't actually make any decisions because they've fallen out over something key. So that is definitely one of the key contracts that we would recommend getting in place early. And particularly as you grow and you bring other people on board, it's about having that framework. And not only obviously your constitutional documents, but your employment contracts, as you said, your contracts with suppliers, your IP documents. So if the core fundamental of your business is intellectual property or your brand, it's about getting that asset properly secured. Because when it comes down to sell, that is what the buyer is going to be looking at. And you can have, the best business idea and the best business in the world, but unless you've got the legals to underpin it and secure it, what's it worth?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen a lot of companies which have out-of-date shareholder agreements. So it's not just about having one, but it's having one that's in date. And a lot of people actually don't follow what's said in the shareholders agreement either. And then when there's disputes, when you do bring lawyers in, people get in a lot of trouble. I think it's not just about having one, but it's about having it up to date too.
Exactly. And it's, as you said, knowing what's in there. Because a lot of the times business owners will think the contract says something and that's how they'll act. But when they really look at it, it's not the case. And it's really key for when, even from a tax planning perspective, because if you have a business with a partner that you've been with for a while and then you get divorced, how's that going to impact the other shareholders? So the other shareholders need to have clarity on the longevity of the business if their fellow shareholders get divorced. There's so much to it. It's not just between the shareholders themselves, but there's also that.
I mean, speaking of divorce, a shareholders agreement is effectively a prenup for a business.
Right?
Exactly. And it's really important to have that so-called prenup because a lot of business relationships do deteriorate, and especially in the small business space, a lot of business ventures start with families and friends. And it's not necessarily you've picked the right person to do business with, you've sort of fallen into the right place at the right time. And you get further down the road and you're like, right, I want to grow this business to something really big.
Exactly.
Johnny wants to go to the pub every Wednesday.
Exactly.
It's not going to work.
Exactly. And we see it so many times where you have that exact scenario, but there's nothing in place, or what they do have in place isn't up to date and reflective of the value that each person brings into the business. So, in the worst case scenario there where you don't have something and you're both 50% shareholders, you could be walking away splitting the value completely when one person's been doing the hours, putting all of the time and effort in. The other person, as you said, has been down the pub and not putting the time in. So it's always something fundamental that we stress is whenever you're setting up a business and you're putting money into it, and it's not just yourself that's the sole shareholder. You need to think about the shareholders agreement and the articles of association.
If I was to poke the bear then, let's say you're a small business, you're a startup, you don't really have, you don't have thousands and maybe even hundreds of pounds to invest in legal advice or to get someone to once over it. What's the best thing somebody can do to make sure it's legit? Because we can all open a Word document, we can all open ChatGPT and we can all sort of write something with rules, but what makes it legally binding? What protects you as an individual within that agreement?
Yeah, so there's a lot of obviously key fundamentals when drafting a contract, and I won't bore you with the set requirements for the formation of a contract with consideration, how it's executed, all of the rest of it. But that is why it is so fundamental to instruct a lawyer to make sure that the provisions that you're drafting are concise and legally binding, because a lot of the times what you write might not actually be interpreted the way that you've intended or actually legal, because there's various things such as penalty clauses where it's unenforceable because it's a penalty. To follow that, it's about having thought of all of the scenarios, because if you have a contract that you drafted yourself, you don't have that expert legal advice where they've thought of all the possible ways that this is going to be interpreted. And I fully appreciate business owners when they're setting up, the costs are expensive, and the last thing you think is, do I really want to spend money drafting this document which I don't think I'm ever going to use, and I'm on really good terms with my partner? Is this ever going to be of value to me? Because you don't see the value at the time when everything's okay. You only see the value when you're sat in a dispute 5 years later and you're like, oh wow, I'm glad I've had that shareholders agreement in the drawer for 5 years. So it's about understanding what contracts are key for your business at the relevant stage of its life cycle, and slowly growing. Because I would love to come on here and say you need to get every single contract that you've done for your business absolutely perfect and spend loads and loads of money. It's just not realistic. It's about focusing on the ones that are key.
Yeah. I think one of the key ones, I remember going to a construction real estate seminar that you guys ran, and it was talking about payment terms. And I think that's a really important contract to get right, is when you're a subcontractor on a big deal and you're not, you're getting paid in large lump sums periodically, you need to make sure that you understand what you're signing into and that you've read the clauses that they've written in their in their bylaws too, because you can get completely, you can go bankrupt essentially without the right things. And investing whatever it is, a couple of grand and some legal advice will save you what's the opportunity cost there?
Exactly. And we see that so much with tech businesses because, as you can probably imagine, tech businesses, the owners, they focus on what they're good at, and that's the tech. And particularly now with obviously ChatGPT, they think they can sort of get their contracts done quite quickly through ChatGPT. But if you're approaching these big institutions to sort of sell your tech or to license your tech, their legal terms are going to be completely sound, and you're playing from a very uneven playing field. And we see so many times they get unfortunately taken advantage of because they don't spend the time or make the investment to have lawyers look over their contracts. And as you sort of just touched on there, you don't necessarily have to have a lawyer draft your contract, but it's at least at the bare minimum have someone check it over for you, and that is usually a lot less of a cost.
And actually that's exactly what I help a number of different companies do, especially these early stage ones. I work with a lot of people who are sort of putting together a new joint venture of some sort. So they're already successful, right? But they don't want to put too much money into this new thing. And we'll sit down and we'll do the shareholders agreement together. We'll do all of the sort of kind of needs in the contract together, and then we'll package it up and take it to a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly.
But speaking of that, actually, one thing I'm super interested in is obviously you guys have big offices, you have lots of different departments. Pretend I'm a business owner, I know nothing about how that's all set up. How should I know who to go to when it comes to an employment contract or an employee-related dispute versus a contract with a client versus the shareholders agreement versus I'm looking to buy a company and need due diligence done? Like, how do you know where to go? And are there different, obviously there are different types of lawyers, but could you, for example, sign off on all of those things yourself, or how does it work?
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I would say is whilst I always would try to give it a go on all those things, it's fundamental that you get specialists for each area of law, because you know what they say, if you're master of everything, you're a master of nothing. So at HC, we're a full service law firm, so we do everything other than criminal. So we have various different departments, particularly is useful for our M&A transactions. So when we've got stuff that come up on their diligence and you need someone in employment law, we'll then call our employment colleagues to then come and look, because there are a lot of different niches that you can't physically understand all of it without spending a lot of time. So I focus predominantly on the corporate side. You obviously have a working knowledge of all of the other stuff, and that's what's key, is having a solicitor that obviously understands all of the various areas, that whilst they might not be able to give you solid definite advice on each of these various areas, they know roughly what they're talking about, and they can then point into the direction of the specialist. So for example, if you need stuff for the property, so you need a new lease, or you've got an employment dispute, or you've got a contractual commercial dispute, or you need your commercial T's and C's negotiated. Usually a lot of corporate lawyers will have a working understanding of all of those. And as I said, at HC, we then point you into the direction of, look, go speak to my colleague over there. He will be able to advise you on all of the possible scenarios with that. So then you're ensuring that you've got coverage from all angles.
Yeah, so it's important to go to maybe a bigger player who has more of the expertise.
Exactly, and that's the problem sometimes with, I guess, smaller law firms, because you don't want to be sort of jumping between law firms, getting advice in different areas, and you still retain your key contacts. So if I'm the lead and you've known me and you want to work with me, I'm then the person that manages your employment advice and your real estate advice. So you don't have to worry about it, and it's all under one roof. And at the end of the day, we just then give you the package of, look, we've got every single area sorted for you.
What if we talk about people problems then? Because people problems are sort of the biggest thing in most companies. A employment contract is great. Having a lot of people have HR consultants, and they're the ones who give people boilerplate contracts, check over HR policies. Is that enough for a business to have a non-licensed kind of, not a regulated kind of professional supply that advice? Is that enough in a small business? Have you seen anything go wrong with people using these sort of HR consultants?
We see it a lot, and that's why I guess our employment team has become so successful at HC, because that sort of stuff keeps them sort of afloat, because constantly when you've got a big business, fundamentally people get upset or things go wrong, and you always become inundated with claims, a lot of the time, which can be based
nonsense.
With nonsense. Yeah, exactly. And you don't ever want to be in a scenario where you have an employment contract which is either sort of invalid, insufficient, or out of date. So we'd always strongly recommend that you have expert employment law, not only for your contracts, but all of your internal policies as well, because when these things go to the tribunal, say there's an allegation of a certain culture at your place, they'll look at all of these policies. And whilst obviously the people in HR, the consultants, they'll have a very, very good working knowledge, there's a difference between that and then the legal fundamentals and what they look for. And our employment lawyers have years and years of experience of judgments at the employment tribunal, and they know what people look at and the small things which end up costing companies thousands and thousands.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in small businesses you have that. I mean, I've got a client in hospitality right now where they have to, since we've started working together, we've had to lay off quite a large percentage of the staff actually, because they weren't the right hires.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately for a number of months we didn't have the power to do that because the right documents weren't in place. A lot of people didn't even have the right employment contracts. And it's like when you open that can of worms, like this business isn't even going to be remotely saleable one day because it hasn't got anything there. And a lot of the value when you look at EBITDA multiples in selling companies is in what's inside of the business. How good are the people? How strong are the contracts? How long term are the contracts with their clients, etc. And I think people don't layer up the importance of investing in that.
Definitely, particularly when you've got client-facing businesses as well. Because if you have a client-facing business, your employees are one of your key assets. And if you don't have a proper employment contract containing things like restricted covenants and all the rest of it, a buyer is going to be straight away alarmed, because that employment contract is what protects the value of that business.
Absolutely.
So if you don't have restricted covenants, those employees could walk out day one, steal all your clients, and what coverage have you got against it? So yeah, I completely agree, particularly for those client-facing businesses as well.
Yeah. What are some of the other pitfalls of not investing in the right legal advice? What are some of the worst situations you've seen companies in, or where money's been lost?
Yeah, unfortunately that there are quite a few, and thankfully not ones that we've been involved with. We usually always last to know, and they come to us and tell us. There's countless. One of them recently was a client who they didn't want to pay for a franchise agreement that they were drafting. So they used one which they'd rolled out in Portugal. So it was all based on Portuguese law. And you can already hear where I'm going with this. So they tweaked the relevant things which they thought they needed to, and changed the sort of governing law to the UK, because they thought the framework or the contract is the same. This is how we want them to run the business, all the rest of it. What they didn't realise is that Portuguese law and UK law judge certain things very differently. And I've sort of mentioned the word penalty clauses earlier, and the UK has very strict laws on penalty clauses. And just to give you a brief summary, when a clause is deemed to be a penalty, it's usually unenforceable. So whatever that clause says is pretty much striked out. And a lot of the provisions in this document from the Portuguese law doesn't recognise the same penalty clause concept. So a lot of them referred to this being a penalty if you do X. Straight away, that's unenforceable in the UK. So they then came to a dispute scenario where they said, this franchisee is liable for X, Y, and Z, and these are all the penalties that you have to pay under the contract. The UK law is you can't have these penalty clauses. So they lost hundreds of thousands of potential liabilities against this person. And I guess on the flip side, to give you another scenario, because people don't realise the value of the contracts until they're in that scenario. We had a client recently who sold their business, and when you sell your business, there's usually a mechanism in there which says if there's a claim against your business that the buyer can sue you for, they can set it off against your future payments. So instead of you having to fork out the money yourself, they'll just say, look, we owe you £1 million next year, we'll just chalk it off of that. But there's very set rules of when you can and can't do that. And buyers, when they owe you the money, that's when they have the leverage. So they'll be looking of any way to get around that. And recently, a buyer with our client was trying to frivolously hold off upwards of £750,000. And they just did it. They said, look, we think there's loads of claims coming in the future. These are our reasons, but not giving them any specified details or a specified claim of why they were holding this money. And they just held it back and then paid the clients the balance of that payment. They came to us and we said, let's be very clear here. This is, it's not something they can do. You've got these clear parts in the contract which says when they can set off. And now, obviously acted on behalf of them, sent them a very clear letter saying, you can't do this, pay us the money now and interest. And that situation is now being resolved for them. Because a lot of people think, they won't do it. We're on such good terms. It will never happen. It does happen. And people will try take advantage as much as they can when money's involved. So, yeah, that's two scenarios, the good and the bad.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, as you said, when money gets involved, people get very greedy and things fall apart. And you have to have those in place to protect yourself, even if you're best mates. And I say that to everyone I ever speak with or meet, you got to get it in place. And, to your point there, I think having the right trusted advisors, whether it's lawyers, accountants, consultants, whatever you call it, is super important, because I've seen a number of businesses get roped into bad deals by good negotiators. And if they had run it by a respectable lawyer or anyone who sort of knew what they were doing, it wouldn't have happened. Like, I've seen a business take an investment, which was really a loan, and then they gave equity away. So it's as if I'm offering to buy, I'm going to loan you 100K, Harry, right now, but I also want 40% of your business, and you're going to repay me for the loan. It's like, is that not the worst trade deal ever in the history of the world?
We see that all the time as well. And that's why one of the fundamentals of our business is the whole way we run our business is on repeat business and building relationships. And it's about giving legal advice, which is not just legal, but also commercial. So, you speak to your clients and you look more than just at what the contract says. You look at the deal and you sort of give them, your opinion on, okay, is this what's right for you? And we always try to add that extra service, because it's not, legal advice per se, but as you just said there, you have a client come to you and say, oh, this is what I'm doing. They're loaning me money, but I'm also giving them equity. We sort of say, hold on, have you thought about this? Have you thought about different debt funding where you don't have to give up 40% of your business? And it's those small differences which make such a big difference when you're looking for an advisor.
But where does the sort of road stop between lawyer, accountant, tax planner? Because a lot of people, their first advisor in business is their accountant, because they know the numbers. And accountants advise on a lot of tax things, which often they shouldn't be advising on. They advise on contractual things, again, they shouldn't be advising on.
Definitely.
Where do you generally recommend that somebody starts involving a lawyer in the discussion? Maybe I'll give you an example. Let's say we are looking at issuing new shares in the business, maybe an employee share scheme. We've spoken with the accountant. We've agreed that 5% dilution across all the shares. So we're going to allocate 5% for the employees, and we're going to give blah, 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 blah. Like, at what point do we involve a lawyer in that discussion?
Definitely. And, depending on how close you've been with your accountant and how long they've been working for you, you should always be having advisors that know what they don't know and bring in the right people at the right time. So that's something we will always do, is when we're dealing with things such as employee share schemes. Then the first thing we'll say is, look, this is the part that we're going to do, and this is the journey that we can take you from. But you need to speak to your accountant about this. And if you don't know an accountant, here's a couple of people that might be useful that you should go speak to, because you definitely need to make sure that you don't stray into the territory where you have an accountant advising on legal stuff or a lawyer advising on accounting and tax stuff. We'll always give our view, but we'll tell you need expert tax advice to rely on it. We'd never give you tax advice to rely on. So it's making sure you have an advisor that knows the clear boundaries, because at the end of the day,
it's very hard though, right? Because a lot of people like to make as much money for themselves as possible,
and you want to be as helpful as possible. But it's very important to know what you don't know and to not stray those boundaries.
Totally. And also to join the dots, because a lot of, as we said at the start of our discussion today, a lot of the things that you invest in, 5-10 years ago are going to be important today. I think, before we came on air, we were speaking about the importance of having, your shareholding up to date, right?
Definitely. So the first thing that buyers look at is your statutory registers. So that is it's the sort of Bible of all of the transactions that have occurred in the company since its incorporation. It shows you where the shares have been held from the date you incorporated it to the current date. And buyers the buyer solicitors, unfortunately, that's the job for us, is we'll look forensically through there to map out where those shares have gone. And one of the most common scenarios that we see is where, and as you sort of just mentioned there is the company will have undertaken a buyback, usually done by their accountant. And sorry for any accountants watching it, but usually done incorrectly, because buybacks follow a very specific legal structure. And if you haven't done it to the letter, it's usually invalid. And what that means is the shares were never cancelled or they were never bought back and they stay with the original person. So many M&A deals, we have to resolve a buyback. And it's so fundamental because it means that, you know, if you're going to sell your company and you say, look, I've got 100% of the shares, if we find a bad buyback, you no longer have 100% of those shares that you're trying to sell. So the buyer immediately will say, no, we need to get this resolved. And the worst time to resolve a buyback is when you're trying to sell, because the original shareholder, you know, if they find out that you're, you know, about to sell the business for 10 million, they're going to say, oh, how much do you need me to sign these new documents? And we've seen it before where, you know, a former shareholder, they would already been paid at the time to do that buyback.
That's terrible.
And the buyback's been done wrong. Then they hold them to ransom. And we had one where it was in the hundreds of thousands and you're talking 2 days before completion, before D-Day. And there's nothing you can really do because it's been done wrong. You know, obviously you can then sue the advisor that did that at the time. But it's so fundamental.
What about, again, connecting it back to what lawyers know versus what tax experts know, the tax and capital gain implications of, let's say, employee share option schemes. So let's say I own 100% of a business and I want to allocate 10% of my shares to go towards employees who earn them over a time period. Now, in my head, let's say I didn't know anything, I'm going to ask my accountant about it, and they might say, oh yeah, you can do that, mate, go speak to a lawyer. But are you guys aware of the tax implications in those situations? Or do you have to go and speak to a tax specialist?
We will usually always have a working knowledge, but we will always advise you to, you know, go get sufficient tax advice, because we will never want to implement a transaction for you that may not have the desired tax outcome that you think. Because whilst we have a working knowledge of it, we'll say that's the scenario, but we can't guarantee, you know, that is your present situation, because we don't go into the same detail as your tax advisor will.
No.
The same way the tax advisor will say, oh yeah, you need this legal document to do this, but they won't fully know the legal consequences. It's like on M&A deals, for example. It's probably a good example is we always work with the tax advisors on the tax governance. So we will advise as to the legal consequences, but the tax advisor will advise to the tax consequences. And there is, you know, those lines blur quite a lot, and you know, we'll stray into a bit of tax, they'll stray into a bit of legal, but you sort of come together. So yeah, I guess we'd usually be the ones that kick off the conversation and say, look, there's a bit of a tax saving here. I'd go speak to your accountant to confirm it. Just to go back to M&A, we sort of always say that with sellers looking to get cash out of the business, because sometimes they will, you know, try to take dividends early, or they'll say, how can I get my free cash in the business? And we'll say, look, go for a completion accounts mechanism where you can, you know, it's a tax efficient way of getting your cash out, but go speak to your accountant first to confirm it, because we don't forensically go into all of the scenarios that affect your business to be able to confirm that tax advice. So yeah, there's a balance. Yeah,
I mean, that's something that most people don't know, which I think is the important thing to realize. And again, like just going back to what we always speak about, there's nothing wrong with a small boutique accounting firm or a small boutique law firm, but you need to make sure that they're very reputable and they're not just there because your dad or your mate uses them.
Yeah.
And that's where I see the biggest mistakes come from, because you don't even know, you don't have a benchmark for what good looks like. So you need to really shop around and get the right, you know, the right advice.
Definitely. And you need someone that adds value, and they don't just give you, you know, plain legal advice. You want someone that understands your business, understands your sector, and is able to advise you on more than what is just the terms. How's it going to impact your business? How is this going to, you know, make you more money? How's it going to impact it 5-10 years time? So there's a lot more to being a lawyer than just drafting the contracts, which is...
Well, it's like any professional services business. You've got to be really good at what you do. You've got to know, as you said, what you don't know. And you've got to have the right network of partners.
Exactly.
So like, you know, we do some business together. It's like you've got to have the right accountancy to refer somebody to, the right recruitment consultancy to refer somebody to, the right business advisor, M&A broker. Like, this is way beyond just knowing, you know, your stuff and going to university. This is really important to know who to bring into the room and who your sort of flying formation of a team is, because there's nobody out there who's built a business successfully, or there's probably a few, right, anomalies, but there's very few out there who've built very successful businesses without a really, really strong A team behind them of external advisors.
Definitely. And even just on the M&A process, it's important to have a team. So let alone just your whole business, you need to have a whole team when you're undergoing a sale or an acquisition. Because it's not just the lawyers, it's, as you said, the accountants, it's the tax advisors, it's all of the people doing your due diligence. You can never just sort of do it as a one-man band, because as you said, you need people that know what they don't know, and everyone has their own set things that they focus on and advise on, because you can't do everything yourself.
No, you can't. I
drive
mean,
you
I think
crazy.
that's probably a key message out of this. Is you can't do everything yourself. ChatGPT isn't a lawyer. And the cost of not doing it is almost always going to be something you're going to regret in the future.
Definitely, and the ChatGPT thing, it's obviously made it very difficult for us, because you have clients who, until they've experienced your service, they don't realise the value, I guess, immediately, and they see that ChatGPT can, give them a contract very quickly. But what I would say is, if you use ChatGPT to do your contract, one, you're going to have a contract which you don't understand and that you haven't had a lawyer explain to you, and you're going to have a contract which isn't tailored to your business and the business needs, and it doesn't have that up-to-date, bespoke drafting that a lawyer would have, because we always are keeping up to date with how things changes. We've got the experiences, we know how things are interpreted, we know how it needs to be drafted to fit your business. And at the end of the day, if ChatGPT gets it wrong, who are you going to sue? Because you can't sue ChatGPT, because you can definitely sue the law firm.
Well,
we have PR which will pay out if we've done it wrong. So
100%.
And it's there to protect your business, these contracts. So why would you trust some internet-based software, AI software, to produce something which is going to be so fundamental to your business? You wouldn't. I could go on for hours.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, it's obviously tempting. A lot of people have their contracts written on it. I mean, there's this hierarchy that somebody made, I forget their name, but it's like get profitable, get legal, get ethical in those stages. And, often, yes, and again, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that I had a full contract in year one of my business. Did not, to be honest with you. But you eventually get to a point where you're serious and you're making some money and you have to go and do it. So I'm not saying you have to on day one go into debt paying legal fees, but you should think about it long term.
As I said earlier, it's being proportionate to the stage of where your business is. So you don't want to spend loads of money on getting every single contract that your business has perfect right at the beginning. I understand, that's just not possible, not practical. It's as you go along, it's prioritizing those key contracts that give value to your business and the ones that are going to stay with you forever.
Well, a startup or new business setup guide would be quite useful from a reputable company like yours. I know you guys have a bit of an entrepreneur center in your farmer office, but it's like, if I start day one blank, these are the 5 or 6 documents I need. Here's a boilerplate. They're not going to be perfect, but here's a boilerplate. Go fill them in, and then maybe a little bit of service from you guys. I think that'd be a huge gap in the market to fill. Yeah,
definitely, and that's something that I guess we're working on, because we have a very deep focus on entrepreneurs, and we've got the Entrepreneurs Hub, which you've mentioned, where we work with local businesses for office space, and we also sort of bring them in to give them talks and give them a little bit of advice. But definitely, it's I think so useful if we could sort of get that out to business owners and say, look, here are the key things. And we've started that already with legal health checks. That's something which is we sort of bang the drum on for so long about doing, particularly if you've got an eye on selling.
You have to, but nobody ever fills them out.
Nobody ever fills them out.
This is the problem. You give so much value to people and they don't want to fill them out.
But then 5 years later, when they've come to sell, they'll say, "Oh, I've got this problem in DD. Can you help?"
It's like, "Oh, well, that's going to cost you."
And now it's 10 times the price. Yeah. It's I could give you countless stories of why it's so important to do it. Yeah. And I guess the one key one that I've got on the top of my head is a financial services business that we were actually acquiring. Not we, our client was acquiring, and it was valued at around 5-6 million. It was a great business, had loads of really high net worth clients. It was an owner managed business. He'd sort of run it by himself. He was the lead advisor. 6 million valued the clients. Turned out he had no actual client agreements, because he'd been, running it as his own business, as casual as you like, for 20 odd years. No client agreements. Suddenly the value of 6 million is falling apart very quickly, and you have that exercise prior to completion of trying to sign them all up, and if you don't have them signed up, that's them chipped off the valuation. It's a health check, I cannot stress it enough, is the most important thing to securing value or actually improving your value.
100%. Well, I think there's a lot of great advice in that today as a starting point for business owners. Again, the intention of this session is to give you the stepping stones and what you need to know and why you need proper legal advice. And I think there's been enough potent examples today as to why at some point you need to invest in it properly, and probably consider having a chat with Herrington Carmichael as opposed to, or in addition to, your local boutique, and sort of see the difference that's going to give you.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I'll always say is we, are always more than happy to have a non-obligation conversation with clients. We'll always have a initial meeting, a phone call to discuss any of your problems or your issues, or even if you just want to say, look, this is where I want to be, this is where I want my business to go. We're more than happy to have those initial conversations. No obligation, no cost. That's just the way we do business. So
fantastic.
But no, thank you very much for
Awesome.
having me on. As always, it's a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll be doing more together soon.
Great to have you on, Harry.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Tim. Cheers.